Hey, Gong Xi Fa Cai. Happy New Year. It's the year of the wood dragon, and I hope those of you that celebrated had ate lots of dumplings last week. I'd like to welcome you to the Woodrow Wilson Center. My name is Jennifer Turner. I direct the China Environment Forum here, and I want to thank you all for joining us for today's Green Tea Chat that's going to explore the question, is China hungry for carbon-free beef? Now, people rob banks because that's where the money is. And my two guests, André Vasconcelos and Ren Peng, they work on agricultural commodity trade because that's where the deforestation is happening. In fact, ag commodity trade is like the top driver of deforestation, and this is producing lots of greenhouse gas emissions. You'll get some detail from my speakers. We're going to focus today mainly on Brazil-China ag commodity trade, but the conversation, like our tea, will be free-flowing, and it can be shaped by you at home who are tuned in. Look underneath the webinar, and you'll see that there's a little widget for you to submit a question. Appreciate it if you give the name and your affiliation, because it's nice to know who's there. And I think we're going to get started. So you can submit questions at any time. So André is the Global Engagement Lead at Trace Global Canopy Supply Chain Mapping Initiative that's being done together with the Stockholm Environmental Institute. Now, André coordinates his team's engagement activities. They're trying to create solutions-focused dialogues with global actors to really try to clean up the ag commodity chains and make them more sustainable. Over the last 5 years, his deforestation and supply chain work has focused predominantly on Chinese and European markets. And now, Ren Peng. Since 2007, excuse me, Ren Peng has worked at the Beijing-based Global Environmental Institute, where he is the program director of overseas investment, trade, and the environment. And as his title seems to say, he focuses on improving environmental policies and ESG management along supply chains between China and Africa and China and Latin America. And like André, he's creating research and projects with Chinese NGOs, international groups, businesses that are working in this space. I want to let you know that today's event is part of the China Environment Forum Ohio State University project called Cool Agriculture, where for the past 18 months, we've been diving into the greenhouse gas emissions of the agri-food systems in China and the US. And today, for the first time, we're taking this conversation international. Going to focus mainly on China, but I don't know, maybe they're going to mention the US here. I don't control my speakers. I just ask them questions and they go crazy on me sometimes. I want to thank the co-sponsors, the Environmental Change and Security Program and the Brazil Institute at the Wilson Center. And also I have to give a big shout out to our talented AV team that makes our connection possible today. So, all right, enough of me. Let's set the stage. So André, maybe could you share your PowerPoint? And I'd like you to get, he's giving a very short presentation about the role of ag commodity trade and the greenhouse gas footprint of soft commodities around the world. So do you want to share those slides there, André?
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening for those in China. I would just share my screen quickly here. And just wanted to present a little bit of an analysis that we did for ahead of COP28 last year, the end of last year. And just to contextualize why we did this analysis is mostly, as Jennifer introduced in the beginning, between 50 and 99% of the deforestation in the tropics is directly or indirectly linked to agriculture. So then we wanted to understand how much of this expansion and the deforestation caused by the expansion of these commodities are generating emissions across the globe. So we looked at 5 agriculture commodities, so beef, soybeans, palm oil, pulp and paper, and cocoa. And in 6 countries, try to understand the emissions associated with the deforestation related emissions associated with the expansion of these commodities, and also understand the exposure of the consumer markets, the markets that are importing those commodities, so to understand the exposure to CO2 emissions. And what we found was quite shocking actually to us. we found that only these 5 commodities in 6 countries are generating over 700 million tons of CO2 equivalent emissions, which if we compare to a country, it's the equivalent or actually greater than all the emissions of Germany combined in one single year. So that was quite shocking for us. And when we start breaking this down to understand which are the commodities that are most or that are generating most of these emissions when it comes to deforestation, so we see that beef is one of the key ones, and that's why we are focusing today here on beef, but also palm oil, wood pulp, and then soy and cocoa. And here in red, we are seeing the total emissions associated with the deforestation caused by the expansion of these commodities. And in green, we are seeing how much of that is actually linked to exports. So for example, in Brazil, we know that a lot of the beef production is actually directed to export, or a lot of actually is consumed in domestic markets, between 70 and 80%, depending on the time, on the year. Palm oil, a lot of the production in Indonesia is actually aimed for exports, the same for wood pulp and soy in Brazil, Argentina, and in Paraguay. And then when we look at the importing markets, and here the idea is not to blame the importing markets, but just to understand which are the main or the key consumers and the key markets exposed to those emissions that can help producing countries to address this deforestation and deforestation related emissions. And we see that China is a key one, or in other words, is the most exposed to this deforestation related emissions in the case of these 5 commodities, then followed by the Middle East and North Africa countries, India, the EU, and others. And if we look specifically at China, which is the focus of today's conversation, we see we have these numbers broken down here, and we see that because of peatlands, China is most exposed to these emissions via the imports of wood pulp, and then palm oil, and also Brazilian beef. So these 3 commodities are key for Chinese stakeholders to look at when it comes to addressing emissions associated with their imports. But just as I said in the beginning, the idea here is not to blame one country or the importing, but actually to as these commodities are produced in tropical areas but are consumed around the globe, is to understand and identify which are the countries that can contribute the most, and then discuss the opportunities for collaboration between these countries, between the companies, the private sector, to address this global challenge. I will finish here, and I hope that we have time to dive a little bit more on the opportunities for tackling this issue. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you. And so I know that's the main object today, not just to be the problem, but just one short look in. So you were on my very first Zoom when COVID started, deforestation in the time of COVID. Andre, would you say that the rate of the beef and these commodity exports out of Brazil, for example, is it a lot higher than it was 4 years ago when we last talked?
So what we're seeing, the deforestation associated with the exports are, increase for one commodity and decrease for others. So for example, for pulp, we saw a slightly increase in Indonesia. For beef, we see pretty much stable. It didn't very much across the years. But what we're seeing in comparison with our last conversation on our webinar in 2020 is that now China has been engaging more and more in these conversations via joint statements with the US, with Europe, with Brazil, most recently in 2023. So we are seeing that not just the Chinese government, the Brazilian government, but stakeholders overall are engaging, are recognizing this issue in a broader sense, and are advancing, making some progress to make those supply chains more sustainable and deforestation free.
No, this is good. So glad. That's why I came knocking on your door again. So Ren Peng, is there anything that you want to add, to what Andre just talked about some of the trends and impact of China's beef trade with Brazil? I know you were in Brazil not that long ago, so tell us some of your insights on the I guess the problem.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, for the introduction, and thank you, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Yeah, I agree. We have seen a lot of progress has been made in terms of those commitments, like China made commitments together with other countries, whether multilaterally and bilaterally, like China-US declaration on climate change, and also the Glasgow declaration, leadership declaration. And more importantly, last year, China and Brazil also made a joint declaration on the climate change. And maybe later I can mention about it. But to add on what Andrew just described, to add on some statistics, because my work currently is focused on the China-Brazil. So over the past years, the trade in agricultural products between China and Brazil has grown rapidly. In 2022, approximately 48% of the China's beef imports, was from Brazil, and well, about like 62% of Brazil's beef exports were for the Chinese market. So that's some background of this, China and Brazil beef trade issues. And yeah, I was in Brazil, my first time, in Brazil in November last year. So so uh, so the trip that was for us, during the pandemic, we have lots of extensive communication with our Brazilian partners. So, and finally, our first time in November last year, we have a chance to visit Brazil. And the purpose of our trip was to explore the firsthand dynamics of the beef production and trade, and to better understand, the real situation of the controversial 2012, forest code. And we have visited cattle farms and also visited the stakeholders from industries and government. And it's lots of interesting conversation. Later on, maybe I have enough time to share with you. And 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 also with the background, I also want to mention about another statistics. With the background of 80% of Brazil beef production is consumed domestically, and only 20% for exports. And so it's very interesting to learn that Brazilian domestic demand for sustainability is such as carbon neutral beef products is emerging in some states. And there are also indeed some government endorsed traceability system, both at the state level and the federal government, national level, such as Sal Verde, Pala, and Green Passport in Mato Grosso, and more recently, the upcoming Agro Brazil Plus Sustainability Platform, initiated by MAPA, will be released in July this year. So this very encouraging progress also been made on the Brazilian sides. And during my trip also, actually, my president also observed some calamity pressure, facing by the Brazilian agricultural production. And during our trip, we visited one soy farm. Actually, we have witnessed how dry weather, as a result of climate change, has impacted soy production, which kind of linked to the food security, food security issues, which are very much concerned by the Chinese, Chinese side. If we're talking about the commodity trade issues, yeah. Okay, I'll stop there.
Well, I mean, again, just to kind of echo what I just said a moment with Andre, this is a lot different than 4 years ago, that there's actually a recognition that this kind of unsustainable export, it couldn't, it could threaten China's food security because that's a highly sensitive issue in China. So I'm going to ping back to you, Andre. So Global Canopy and Trace, you guys have done lots of phenomenal tracking of companies driving deforestation in beef and soy. How do you actually use that data to, to make a difference in China and elsewhere? I mean, is this data being used by the Chinese government? So tell us a little bit more about data is great. What you doing with it?
Sure. Just to contextualize a bit, this data that Jennifer is mentioning is, back in 2017 or 16, we had no information about the sourcing areas of different countries, or where specifically, the commodities are flowing from one country to another. So that's what Trace was developed back in 2017 to start connecting consumer markets, importing markets, all the way back to production regions, right? And when we start connecting different data sets, so per shipment data, for example, customs declaration, bills of lading, with many other data sets in Brazil or elsewhere, we start linking back to the production region. And once we start having this clarity or more transparency on the supply chains, it's the first step for us to understand the environmental impacts associated with those supply chains, right? So we started linking these flows to deforestation, to understand the exposure of trading companies and consumer markets to deforestation. So the idea is that through science-based and data-driven approach, we shed some lights on those supply chains and then enable the private sector and companies first to understand where they source from. Second, to understand the environmental impacts associated with their imports. And what we are seeing with this data, I think the first and perhaps one of the key insights that we get out of this data is that the concentration of the deforestation associated with these imports, or the deforestation, associated with those exports are highly concentrated in a few places. So just to give an example here, in the case of Chinese beef imports from Brazil, so we're talking about 2,900 Brazilian municipalities that supply beef to China. But just 110 municipalities, or in terms of percentage, fewer than 4%, is where 70% of all the deforestation associated with these imports are concentrated. So this information enable the private sector and the Chinese, government agencies to start thinking about policies, to prioritize their efforts to target this deforestation and emissions associated with the imports.
So it's an overwhelming problem, but your data showed maybe not as overwhelming, because I mean, when you said 2,900 cities, okay, down to 100, that's almost manageable.
Exactly. The idea is to break that complexity, right? Yep. To give targeted, or to enable targeted actions to prioritize efforts and resources.
And so do you have conversations? Does Global Canopy, do you guys talk with Chinese officials about this data, or mainly with the companies?
So as we are an international organization, we don't see our role as connecting directly with the government, but rather enable partners like Peng, for example.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. All right.
Data science to enable, because of course, Peng is much better place suited to do that work. So we see ourselves as taking the back seats and providing and doing what we are good at, which is data and science to enable actions. Really.
Yep. So that he just passed the virtual mic over to you, Ren Peng. So
yeah.
So what would you like to tell us a little bit about how? I mean, you wrote us a great blog about how Brazil is starting to encourage the carbon neutral beef, and can you tell us a little bit about how GEI and maybe your other partners are engaging? I don't know, the Chinese government, businesses, etc.
Yeah. Before I talk about our story, I'd like to echo what Andrew just described. Like I would say the data tell the story, and the good story, and Global Canopy or Trace the data really be very useful for us to tell this story. This kind of baseline information to draw attention or raise awareness among the stakeholders in China, like the consumers, like industries and the government, and also help us to build this kind of narratives that links the soft commodity supply chain with the climate risks and biodiversity loss. Yeah, although there's some reluctance, the reluctance among the different stakeholders, to this kind of information, but still that's a good direction, and still in the process, we are trying to engaging as many as possible stakeholder in China. And that's why how we started work with the Trace, 2020 with the Trace team, Andrea, and jointly produced our first risk analysis report. We call China's exposure to the deforestation and induced the climate risk from South American beef and soy. That was being disseminated among the stakeholders and has attracted a lot of interest at that time. And yeah, besides that, talking about new carbon neutral beef stability, and it's not only in Brazil, but also some other major beef producing country like Uruguay and also the Australia. And those countries has begun introducing carbon neutral beef certification. And this certification system could create the market, a new market, and also often like offer the pathway to achieve the carbon neutral in the agriculture and the livestock, and as a major beef importer, China is adopting this carbon neutral labeling could expand this nascent market. And as discussed in my articles, this kind of efforts will need more efforts in consumer education and policy support and investments. And in particularly coming to China, Brazil, as my primary focus on, we seek to facilitate such collaboration between China and Brazil through enhancing the market access of sustainably produced and zero deforestation agriculture trade, and as well as by the increasing the policy coordination and the financial incentives for the trade of these zero deforestation products. So basically, we are working on the traceability and also the incentives, including the policy incentive, the financial incentives, by encouraging Chinese market side incentives to support this kind of, sustainably produced different agriculture products. And then it's very important to strengthen mutual communication between the producer country and the consumer country like China, Brazil, among different platforms. And we GEI, in past years we have made some progress. We have signed a cooperating agreement with some states like Mato Grosso states to promote this kind of sustainability of the green beef trade between China and Brazil. And also we will also engage with the Chinese partner like private sector company like Media Association in China, try to build a link and build to facilitate the first what we call the first green deal of the beef between some Chinese company, in Mato Grosso, Chinese company with the company in the meat packer in Mato Grosso, and also some other slaughterhouses in Pará State as well. So we are also now in the process with also negotiating with the Pará States,
That's exciting. Yeah. And I noticed that I liked how it was that part of the MOU is about having a green passport. Where does that green passport, who gives the beef the green passport? Or
yeah.
How does that work? Or how should it work?
It's a kind of actually it's kind of green passport was actually initiated by the state Mato Grosso state government, and supported by the IMAC, is Institute of Meat in Mato Grosso states. So it's kind of a certificate, also include the traceability kind of traceability system to ensure that all the beef was sustainably produced with zero deforestation requirement. And but I would mention that another good initiative we consider as a good initiative is the Site Verde. in Pará State. And they just make a big announcement during the at the COP28, and they are going to achieve the full traceability, which means that like individual traceability of the beef supply chain within their states. So we are also like kind of negotiating with the Pará Samis and the Pará states.
So, and what was that last state that is going to do that?
Pará State.
Pará State. Okay, just want to make sure. Yeah, it's so.
Yes, it's actually two of the biggest agriculture states in Brazil.
And is this where some of those 100 cities are, Andre?
Well, a couple of them probably, but it's in the north part of Brazil. It's in the Amazon part. It's where a lot of the deforestation is taking place at the moment. So in the arc of deforestation. So it's great that they are now building this initiative.
But this is kind of exciting. This kind of basically it's a public-private, cooperation by the state and their companies to like create that green passport. So that, I mean, that strikes me as like a very, very good trend. So just want to remind people, I've gotten a couple questions in, but please submit your questions anytime now. You can only do one every 10 minutes, so don't wait till the last minute if you have a bunch of questions. Just just one question I'm going to interject because it's kind of self-standing that Andre, you don't have who's asked this, but they said that you've done a lot on the carbon neutrality of beef in Brazil, but does the trace data also look at water intensity impacts?
Very good question. It's the frontier of our work. So we have a couple of colleagues who are now actively working on this and trying to understand. They've published a couple of scientific papers looking at this specifically, but we still haven't developed the data set that we want to include this indicator in our platform. Just to mention that all the data that I'm talking about here, you can go to the website trace.earth and you can download and explore all the data there, which is about this supply chain maps of commodities associated with deforestation.
And this was a monster endeavor that you guys did. I mean, the amount of data that you've had to vacuum up and sort out is just jaw-dropping to me. So yay, water next. I think that's important. Thank you. So now I want to ask you both, I mean, Ren Peng gave a few examples, but can you guys, I'd like to look for some positive developments for sustainability and deforestation-free commitments in China or elsewhere. Andre, do you want to start and then back to you, Ren Peng? So it could be like with your own groups or because you've been seen. I know you said you take a back seat, you're the data guy, but you're keeping an eye on what people are doing, right?
Oh, absolutely. And my role specifically is to translate that data and digest it and provide to key stakeholders so then we can help to shape policy development. We can provide and enable the private sector to take actions. So we are at the forefront of this together with Peng and many other organizations across the globe. In terms of some positive developments, there are quite a few. I think Peng mentioned two that are really important in Brazil. Another one, which was quite, especially between Brazil and China, which was coordinated by the Tropical Forest Alliance, the TFA initiative, is this one trading company called COFCO. They made the first deforestation-free contract for soybean supply between Brazil and China. So they committed to deliver this soy, and a certain amount of soy, which is free of deforestation-free, and make that agreement directly with an importer in China. So that actually gives a signal that it is possible, that is feasible, that companies are seriously, looking at this, and they are making the right, developments to achieve that. We see that a lot of other companies have deforestation-free commitments, so they are pledging to, become deforestation-free by 2025 or even later. But we are still not seeing, this actually getting to practice or these commitments being implemented. I think there is a lot of progress, but we still think that looking at the data still remains a lot of gaps. So seeing what COFCO is doing now was was quite how can I say, positive to see and quite encouraging.
Well, a little quick question is that, and either of you can answer that. So you have deforestation-free soy and maybe deforestation-free beef. What is that doing to the price of these products? I mean, I could imagine that's where there's some hesitancy, and because you both kind of hinted at there's like some potential. I think Ren Peng talked about financing. What can you guys tell me about that? The cost. Someone's got to pay. Ren Peng or Andre, either one.
Yeah, that's a very important question. You know, especially when you engage with the company who are really doing the business. You know, we are now trying to engage in the private sector, like we talk to the company directly, like for example, the Mafric in Brazil and some Chinese importing company in Tianjin, and it's always the first question come to, jump out to us. Is that make difference in price? And who's going to pay for it? Yeah, that's the question I need to talk about. And taking COFCO deforestation-free soil agreement as example, I actually are looking into the details and talk to the TFA guys. And they try to understand what's going on there. I think there's a little bit price difference, like the price premium. The actually company pay extra cost in order to have this deforestation-free soy. But since this kind of deal is kind of internal agreement, so it's within the COFCO system. So it's the one batch company buy from another batch company. So they can manage to handle those costs, actual cost. But come to the reality of the real commercial world, this really big question. And when I talk to the company in Brazil, and I think the difference is because of the documentation preparation requirement. So they need to prepare all the documents. That's the increase in cost because they don't change their production practice. Like for example, they're now actually producing the deforestation-free beef, for example. They have capacity to export to the Chinese market and to European market. But the difference is a difference between the EU and China, for example, is different requirements on the documents. So that's the major cost. So we try to look into this and try to overcome this kind of document. That's why we call it the pilot. We try to overcome this cost. And secondly, we also work on the financial incentives, to trying to work on some policies, research, whether the policy or banks can provide some low interest of the loan, for example, to cover this cost, to encourage the company to take down these green deals.
And then they could hopefully market it and then being able to sell it at a higher price wherever they are. Andre, you look like you're ready to jump in there.
Yes, I was ready here to make a contribution. Just wanted to note, I think it's important to note that a lot of the soy that we are talking about here, for example, Brazilian soy or Brazilian beef, a lot of that is already deforestation free. Some of the challenge is, around how in the supply chain, when you are trading those commodities, how you segregate or how you can prove that what you are exporting is actually deforestation free, because they mix, right? In silos, in the slaughterhouse. So that's the challenge, is actually implementing full traceability. And I think that comes, another interesting topic, which is the European Union is now implementing, or will implement soon, end of this year, the deforestation regulation. And they are requesting companies to export to Europe those agricultural commodities, or a few of them. They have to prove, the companies have to provide due diligence and prove that they are deforestation free or not coming from areas that were deforested until December 2020. So Europe is already going ahead and taking this, this initiative and probably the costs to ask companies to implement traceability. So this will shake the global supply chain of these agricultural commodities. So another insight that I wanted to bring here to the conversation is around our data, is that when we look at the exports from Brazil, let's say soybeans and beef, the exports from Brazil to Europe and Brazil to China, we see that the same the companies trading those commodities are the same. So linking to the UDR, the European Union Deforestation Regulation, will request those companies to implement full traceability. So those companies will have the means to do so for China, for Chinese exports as well. To some extent, or in other words, it might lower the barrier for Chinese policymakers to request the same level of information. Because at the end of the day, having that information on traceability provides information about that you can monitor and mitigate potential and future supply risks, as that speaks directly with food supply and food safety, as Peng said.
Yeah, and but this is encouraging. What about? I mean, we haven't. What about the United States? I mean, because 4 years ago when we talked, we were talking a lot about how the U.S. was also looking at this issue. Is the U.S. I mean, the EU, their eyes in the front of all these things. Is the U.S. also getting involved, or Andre?
Yeah, the U.S. has a bill on, I think it's called a Forest Act that, is looking at the same issue, but the only difference or the main difference between the UDR and what the US is trying to, to develop and introduce is that they are only looking at illegal deforestation, right? Whereas the EU is looking at any type of deforestation.
And so, but you're
the UK the same, the United Kingdom the same.
Ah, okay.
Also,
Japan, Australia, Japan. Also, do you know anything about them? Okay,
yet,
just curious.
so.
We'll have another meeting. This is the China Environment Forum, not the Japan. Ren Peng, what's your opinion of this this EU deforestation regulation? Are you?
I think mentioned about the U.S. is a lazy act, particularly on illegal timber issues, and actually, Andrew brought up a very important, very controversial debate on the definition of the deforestation. That's why I want to jump in and EUTR or EU, previously was EUTR, now it's EUDR, and it's kind of using the consumer market power to leverage the change in Brazil. That's good, but when we talk to our Brazilian partner, especially from government, they have a different opinion on this. To address this issue, like they're more prefer to have a bilateral consensus building, on the definition of the deforestation, which is the illegal deforestation and the legal deforestation. According to Brazilian law, like forest code, they have this kind of legal deforestation issues there. And of course, the UDR, as the environment organization, we are fully agree. And I think they're, as Andrew just described, it could potentially influence the global supply chain and encourage the more sustainable practice, in these sectors. But more practically, when you want to address the issue, I think you have to collaborate with the Brazilian government, which is a major producing country government, and first of all, to build a consensus, to have the common understanding on the definition of the deforestation, whether it's illegal or legal deforestation issues, and that could be the approach, for China and Brazil to collaborate, I think.
Well, good. No, thanks you guys for clearing some of that up. What about not again, it's never blaming the consumer, but I'm curious about in Brazil, since this is where most of the beef is consumed, is there also a movement? Are consumers also hungry for carbon-free, deforestation-free beef, Andre?
It's
Are
growing.
they being educated?
It's growing, and I think we need more information to raise awareness of this issue. And I'm glad to mention here one of the initiative of our very close partners, which I encourage people to look at, which is called the Do Pasto ao Prato, which is beef from the pasture to the plate, which is basically an app that people in Brazil can go and scan. When they are in the supermarket, they scan a piece of meat and they get information from which slaughterhouse it's coming from, and environmental and sanitary, information about that specific slaughterhouse. The thing that is cool about this app is because we have information in Brazil that we can map from the beef coming, or the cow coming from farm to the slaughterhouse. So there is a data set already that has this, map that part, but we have no whatsoever information from the supermarket or the slaughterhouse to the supermarket. So when the consumer scan that beef, it gives us information, and we start collating in a data set to map these beef flows from the slaughterhouse to the supermarkets. And now I think we have over 10,000 beef products already scanned, and we are going to release this data set this year. So I think this has a lot of potential to raise awareness, which is pretty much needed in Brazil at the moment.
And Ren Peng, you're also doing, there's similar kind of campaigns in China. I mean, I love the traceability, and I noticed that you, André, that you said both carbon free and a little bit of like a food safety component as well to it, which is, that's also, I know everyone's concerned about that kind of topic. Ren Peng, is there things happening in China along that front, engaging consumers?
Yeah, but I have to say, this topic is a little bit sensitive when we do the public campaign. And so we do it quietly with some high-end restaurants in Beijing, in Shanghai, for example,
Okay.
for our, and also maybe this year we'll doing some not very public, but it's a public event with some high-end like restaurants. We promote this, what we call the high quality and the green beef in the restaurants. Yeah.
I've got a question here from Daniel Jasper, a policy advisor, and he wants to ask, he said, are the presenters concerned that things like deforestation-free beef, carbon neutral beef could be greenwashing some of the carbon footprint of beef, because that cow release methane emissions through their burps, et cetera? Is that a concern, or that's not what you, I mean, that's
there
a
is
question.
definitely that concern, but that means, that doesn't mean that we should not look at this issue, in terms of the traceability and the initiatives that are, taking actions for that. Just to say, in Brazil, 50%, almost 50% of the total emissions per year comes from deforestation. And if we add agriculture on top of that, we are talking about 75%. So we have to address that the main driver of deforestation in Brazil is cattle, or farmers for that plant pasture. So we have to look, if we address the deforestation associated with that expansion, is already a big step forward.
Yeah. Well, I want to point out to Daniel that you go on my website, you could look at a reining in the methane hoof print of California cows. We had a webinar discussing how there are scientists in US, China, around the world that are coming up with food additives like red seaweed, et cetera, that are doing things. It's the burps, people. And actually, if you go to our Cool Agriculture website, we have a publication out that has lots of infographics, and yes, there's a picture of a burping cow. Yeah. So, but that there's a lot of emphasis on how to rein in the methane that way. So yeah, and I think we've got 2 minutes left. Ren Peng, André, do you have a question for each other, or a final huzzah that you want to say here today? Ren Peng, do you have a question for André? You could be mean to him if you want. I know you're friends.
No, we don't have the question now. I don't have a question now.
You don't have a question now, André?
No, I just wanted to, wrap up here and mention that I think, before, back in the days, or when we last spoke on a webinar, Jennifer, in 2020, there was a lack of data, lack of information. So I think there is no excuse anymore for, the private sector, governments to take, serious measures and to seriously start looking at this issue. And what we are seeing is, just to summarize, one of the messages that I bring here is that those supply chains look very complex. But if we look at the data, with transparency, we start breaking that complexity to bring, where actions are most needed. So I think that's my final message here.
And the fact that Ren Peng, that you are able, you already said you're using this data, And again, 4 years ago, I didn't see this kind of conversations happening in China. So are you optimistic, Ren Peng?
Yeah, yeah. I just want to mention one point. Like we, in terms of the public awareness building, actually we had a training workshop last December in Tianjin. With more than 30 company attended our workshop. And the Tianjin port is kind of a major destination for Brazilian beef to China. So and also on a policy level, I think there's under the China-Brazil agreement, there's a subcommittee on the climate and environment. Actually, they had a first meeting. It's this kind of implementation mechanism. So they have first meeting last September to materialize their work plan. So we can see the momentum is wrapping up. So I believe we'll see more business cases in the near future.
Yep. Well, just so you know that we're continuing our cool agriculture project, and in the coming year, we are going to be doing having more conversations, and I'll be knocking on your doors again. And just so the audience knows that on our webpage where we'll put some quotes, we'll also toss on some of the links, and maybe Andre, you could send us that app that you mentioned. It sounds pretty interesting. And so, yeah, so we can add some more information there. And yeah, so let's see, wait. So yeah, we're out of time. Someone came a question, but I think you've kind of already answered it. But I want to thank all of you for tuning in today. And we will, like I said, we're going to be doing more food and climate meetings, and we're going to be going more international. And I want to go to Brazil, just so you know. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a really good morning, evening. I know it's late in China. Applause to Ren Peng for staying up late for us.